Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashem Yahushai, Bashem Makakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teachers his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwath. May listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to hit two and read two stories, just in regards to women's conduct. And a lot of our women, tend to have that spirit, on them, right? And a lot of the times, they can't properly understand that, that the Lord, used a man, within their proximity, whether that man might be their father, maybe that man might be their husband, maybe that man may be their brother, or so on and so forth. The man, that man, the Lord, opened up his mind to receive certain revelations and mysteries and understanding and dark, parables and all this kind of stuff, to be able to judge and make spiritual, discernments. A man, how did Paul say it? Comparing spiritual things with spiritual, right? To be able to understand certain things and discern the times thereof, right? That man might be very precious, but a lot of our women, they see it as an opportunity to basically try and challenge that man's authority, and thinking that they know more, and thinking that they are basically, the Lord, basically opened up their minds, so to speak, right? Yes, the Lord would have situations where he would pour out his spirit upon all flesh. I believe it says that in Joel, and, a lot of, women would see like dreams and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the mantle of being a judge, being a priest, being, a prophet, being, basically somebody who has the role of like a teacher or a bishop or so on and so forth, that heavy responsibility is only dedicated to men, right? It's not in the role, for a woman, right? The scriptures say that the flock of the Lord's pasture are men, right? So a lot of our women have this spirit on them, right? So a lot of our women can actually learn from these two people, these two women within the scriptures here. Let me read this first, and then I'll go to the story. This is Romans chapter 15, verse 4, and it says, "Whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope," right? So these two examples, I'm just going to read real, quickly. You can learn from the mistakes, from these women, women listening, right? So let me start off with the first story. So the first woman was Miriam, which was the sister of our forefather Moses. So I want to read exactly, just a little bit of context. So the title on top here, it says the murmuring of Miriam and Aaron. So it says here, this is Numbers chapter 12, verse 1, and it says, and Miriam and Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. They're also known as the Cushites. And it says, and they said, hath the Lord Yahweh indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. And now the man Moses was very meek above all men which are upon the face of the earth, right? In the AMP here it says, and now Moses was very humble, gentle and kind, devoid of self-righteousness, more than any man who was on the face of the earth, right? So, Moses was a very, very humble individual, right? But, a lot of our women, will have that spirit on them, and thinking that the Lord gave them, certain deep understandings in regards to mysteries contained in the book of Daniel or Revelation or Zechariah and so on and so forth, right? And they basically try to challenge that man of the Lord's authority, whether it might be, like I said before, the husband or a father or a brother or even a son, right? These cases, these things can happen. And a lot of our women have that spirit upon you, because you can't accept the authority of that person, that individual, because you look at it very carnally as opposed to looking at it spiritually, right? So it says here, continuing on, and the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses and Aaron and Miriam, and said, Come out, ye three, unto the tabernacle of the congregation. And the three came out. And the Lord came down in a pillar of a cloud, and stood before the tabernacle, called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. And they said, Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. Right? The Lord reveals his secrets unto his servants, the prophets. Right? But here he says, my servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. With him I will speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches, and the similitude of the Lord shall behold. Wherefore then ye are not afraid to speak against my servant Moses, right? So, they had that attitude of, basically trying to, this guy is really he's not really that special, that's just my brother, so on and so forth. And that's pretty much the same sentiment a lot of our women have, because Yahushua said a prophet is without honor amongst his own kin and amongst his own household, right? So they're looking at him very meek. He's probably dressed very not very plainly and so on and so forth. They kind of look down upon you. That's a lot of our women's mentality, and a lot of them have a very prideful spirit upon them, because and speaking from experience, when I was in school, you had a lot of our women that were in school, like college and university and stuff like that, and then they use that as an opportunity to basically try and challenge your authority as a man, in thinking that you're no longer necessary because I have a PhD or a master's or a doctorate. You know what I'm saying? But you learn philosophies of a serpent. You didn't learn examples of righteousness. You didn't actually learn how to be a woman. You just learned how to actually be a man, right? So, continuing on here, and it says, verse 9, and the anger of the Lord Yahweh was kindled against them, and he departed, and the cloud departed from the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous, right? So her skin, she lost her pigmentation. And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, which means to beg, lay not this sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly and wherein we have sinned, right? So this is what happened, just for her speaking that sort of, way, towards Moses, because, she's looking at the brother, she's looking at Moses as, okay, that's just my brother, that's just Moses, right? And it's the same sentiment. They look down upon the men of the Lord because, we are the so-called foolish things of this world. We are the things that are basically despised to confound the things that are mighty, right? And it says that in Corinthians, and it says, continuing on, where was I? Verse 12, and it says, let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh have consumed, when he cometh out of her mother's womb. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, Heal her now, O my power, I beseech thee. And the Lord said unto Moses, If her father had but spit her in her face, she should not be ashamed 7 days. Let her be shut out of the camp 7 days, and after let her be received in again. So basically she was punished, and out of the camp for 7 days, right? So, and this is not a time where you had like police officers and you had street lights and so on and so forth, right? So there was a lot of, you know this is a time where there's dangers all around you, right? So, in that time, women could be easily manhandled, raped, and so on and so forth, ravished, if you get what I'm saying, attacked by wild beasts and so on and so forth, and this is how she just spoke to, Moses, right? So, it's a cautionary tale, right? You don't know who that man is, right? So, the next story I wanted to hit real quick was Michal, the daughter of King Saul, right? So this is when David basically recovered the Ark of the Covenant. So, there was great joy. This was a very joyful, great day in Israel, right? David had, he was in a good mood. He danced for the Lord. Okay, I'll just read it. Okay, this is 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse, I'll start at verse 16 and I'll just read down to the end. And it says here, and as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in all her heart. And they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord, right? So, and what's interesting as well, this is a great celebration, right? And peace offerings basically was a sacrifice where the priests were able to eat, certain portions of that sacrifice. It was more of a voluntary thing. So everybody was basically in a joyful mood, and the priests were able to actually partake and actually, eat, because there was a good, it was a good day. It was a good victory for our people, right? Under, King David at this time. And it says here, so he dealt among the people and among the whole multitude of Israel, as well to the women as men, to every one a cake of bread and a good piece of flesh and a flagon of wine. So all the people departed, every one to his house. So here's where it gets juicy, so it says, then David, verse 20, then David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself in the eyes of the handmaids and his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovered herself, right? So she had a very strong disdain for the way David, danced for the Lord, right? So it says here, verse 21, and David said to Michal, and it was before the Lord which chose me before thy father, because our father is Saul, right? And it says, and before his house, and appointed me ruler over all the people, over Israel. Therefore I will play before the Lord, right? So she was basically, being like a whole buzzkill. Like, you're not actually appreciating the fact that, you have a man and you're married to a man who's basically seeking after the Lord's heart, after the Lord's mind, right? He was a very, David was a very righteous king, but the fact that, the Lord appointed him, to basically, and, shepherd over, over all of Israel, she couldn't, that was, and then to see David, rejoicing, that was, a moment of discontent, for her. And that's a lot of things that women, and that's another thing a lot of our women, will do, because when they see that you're joyful, without them actually them bringing that joy, they always want to basically rain on your parade, basically. So David checked her right away. So this is what went down, and it says, and I will be, this is what David said, and I will be yet more vile than thus, and I will be base in my own sight, and as for the maidservants and which thou hast spoken of them, shall I had in honor. Therefore, Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child until the day of her death. Right, so she didn't have any children. Right, and this time, that was a shameful thing, because they weren't going off to university and college to study, psychology and stuff like that. They were more seen as women. Women were more seen more pragmatically to be able to ensure, to continue the family line, right, and to basically even cement the relationship between alliances, right. So I think there was an Egyptian woman that Solomon married, but the point really is, not to lose myself, is that this is one of the things that women will do to basically try and usurp, and challenge your authority. They will do these things. They will try and basically, hidden tactics, to be able to jab at men of the Lord, because, we're just not, the men are not in a position of rulership, right? But there's a change that's slowly occurring, right? A lot of the things that a lot of the men of the Lord in these days are coming, these prophecies are speaking aloud on their behalf, right? These things are playing out, these events are playing out, right? So a lot of men of the Lord are going to be very much sought after, even by other women, right? And that's something a lot of our women have to be okay with, right? So I'll leave. Since I mentioned that, I'll just close off with this one right here. What's this? Isaiah 32 verse 2, and it says, and a man shall be as an hiding place from the wind, and a covert from the tempest, and a rivers of water in a dry place, right? Because this is gross darkness, right? So that man that might be in your proximity is a very treasured man, and a man of the hopeful elect, right? Who has actually an understanding and has a relationship with Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? Because the men of this world are either sodomites, they have their consolation prizes in this world, these little trinkets, that have basically fallen off, these crumbs I should say, that have fallen off the master's table. They don't have that rich relationship with Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? And it says here, as rivers of water in a dry place, and a shadow of a great rock in a weary land, right? So that's a shade, right? So a lot of our women will have to learn to just, you have to just appreciate that man, right? So, anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but I just wanted to touch on these two, because I thought these two stories were very, very interesting, because this is something that women will try to do, right? And you women have to just learn to appreciate that man that you have, right? And your programming the programming, you've been programmed backwards by the serpent. You've been programmed backwards by Esau, right? To be adversarial, to compete with your man, rather than to be congruent, to be in cohesion with your man, right? That is something more delightful. So anyways, Lord's will, this lesson was just quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.